right now we turn our attention to what's happening down in Austin. Not too much going on right now, but this week there were some definite happenings, and Chuck DeVore with the Texas Public Policy Foundation joins us every Friday at this time. Chuck, good morning. How are you?
Hey, good morning, Chad. I'm doing great. Here we are on the verge of Easter. Wonderful time of year, and I think you're absolutely right about the French and the Iranians. Man, oh man,
it's sad and scary all at the same time.
Yeah.
Chuck,
Well, it was great to see you last week live from the Capitol.
It was. Fun. We we had a great time, and it was good to see you and so many of the lawmakers that came through, and it's they're busy now. They're actually getting stuff done, which may or may not be a good thing down in Austin. Depends on how you look at it. And one of those things that really got underway was the House and an 18-hour debate over their first version of the budget. Tell us what it looks like right now, the good, the bad, and if there's any ugly, the ugly out there.
Right. Well, it was a marathon session. I was up until about 6 in the morning myself, and it wasn't very useful at work the next day. I tell you, you kind of wonder how lawmakers are able to make good decisions at 5 o'clock in the morning when they're debating important issues. But that seems to be the nature of legislative sausage making. So the bottom line is, if you look at the budget this time around compared to 2 years ago, there's a few things that really stand out. First of all, they're not spending all the money like they did 2 years ago. So they're being more restrained in their spending priorities, and we like that. We think that that's good, good for Texas and good for taxpayers. The next thing is that they seem to be reserving about $2 billion. They're holding that money back. And, of course, the folks on the liberal side want to spend it all. But they're holding it back for one of maybe three different uses. Number one, if no one can agree, they may hold it in reserve, which is fine. Number two, which we really like, they may have that $2 billion as extra tax cuts, depending on negotiations with the Senate. And number three, they may spend it, most likely on additional spending for K-12 public education.
Right. And right now, where are we as far as what the House is thinking when it comes to tax cuts? Because are they still leaning more towards tax cuts for businesses versus property taxes? That's one thing that's the Senate has talked about.
Right. So the big difference between the two houses is if you look at what the Senate's trying to do, they're mainly focused on margin tax relief and property tax relief. So margin tax, of course, is the tax that businesses pay, but as we know, businesses don't really pay taxes. They pass that on to their consumers in the form of higher prices for goods and services. So you got the business tax and the property tax in the Senate side. On the House side, you don't have property tax. What you've got is you've got the business tax and the sales tax. So there's a division between the two, and it appears that maybe the Senate wants to have higher tax cuts, whereas the House may want to have more spending.
Interesting. Well, it's going to be a debate that continues because what we are right now is that you've got to get the Senate and the House to get together on this, and then each one vote on what they're going to do, and it's going to be a process as they hammer out everything. Chuck, let's talk about a story, piece you wrote for Breitbart, Texas. What was it, earlier this week, dealing with transportation, correct?
Yes, it was. Everybody is interested in spending more money on transportation in Texas. More or less, people agree that we could spend that additional money. The question becomes, what do we spend it on? Do we spend it on roads and bridges? Do we have more mass transit and light rail, urban rail systems, which we are not big fans of at the Texas Public Policy Foundation? We think those are costly and inefficient. But beyond that, there is a very interesting debate about reform, procurement reform at TxDOT, the Texas Department of Transportation. We think that if this particular reform is enacted or fully enacted, taxpayers could save about $1 billion a year, which would essentially pencil out to more roads and bridges being built. And the reform is something called design build. It may sound a little complicated to your listeners, but it really isn't. when you do a traditional road or bridge, basically TxDOT engineers or an outsourced contractor, they design the bridge. So you have to put out a bid to get the design. You get the design, and then you put out a bid to build it, right? And then people bid to compete to build the bridge, and then they build it. And that's called bid design, bid build. Well, the alternative to that is design build, and you have the same contractor do the design and the construction. And what's been shown around the world and around the country with federal studies and state studies is you can save up to 29% of the dollar cost of the project, and you can accelerate the project by an average of about 14%. So you can get that road or bridge to be used by Texas drivers earlier than if you use the traditional method. And unfortunately, there are a number of roadblocks that the lawmakers have put up against these reforms in recent years. We think mainly at the urging of smaller design firms that benefit from the status quo. They profit from the current arrangement.
What is the likelihood that something like this gets through the legislature this year?
Well, that's a great question. Basically, what you have is you have three bills out there that are reform bills. One of them is SB 1606 by Senator Huffines, SB 826 by Senator Hall, and HB 3109 by Representative Simmons. And then on the other side, you got SB 1294 by Senator Nichols, and that moves in the other direction. So you have three reform bills, one by the Vice Chair of the House Transportation Committee, one by the Vice Chair of the Senate Transportation Committee. But the chairman of the Senate Transportation Committee, Senator Nichols, has a bill that kind of goes in the other direction. And so it's really anyone's guess, because you basically have the House apparently in favor of more reform and several members in the Senate in favor of more reform, but a very powerful committee chairman in favor of going the other direction, basically reinforcing traditional contracting,
right,
putting limitations on design build, and we think that would leave money on the table, that TxDOT would be less efficient with the bill kind of moving it in the other direction. So right now it seems to be a fight between a irresistible force and an immovable object, right? So, but here's the good news: is that there's an expiration in current statute that says that one of the major inhibitors toward more design build will actually expire this August 31st of this year. The restriction is that TxDOT can't do any more than three of these per year, three of these types of contracts per year, and that goes away. So if the people who are opponents to reform want to keep the status quo, they actually have to pass a bill. And for us, if we want to see more reform, we just have to do nothing. And if we do nothing, then the law that restricts design build expires.
Well, with all the focus that's going to be on transportation, or supposedly will be on transportation during this legislative session, you would think that the bills that you mentioned would be something that will be debated, or at least heard about by members down in Austin. At least one would think, especially when it comes to saving money, which is what a lot of Republicans have run on.
Exactly, and there's actually the one bill that we don't much care for does come up in a committee hearing next Wednesday morning at 8 o'clock. I'll be there to testify against it, and we'll see what happens. It's all part of the process of debate and discussion, and trying to understand each other's positions and see what we can come out of a process that's good for Texas.
Very interesting visiting with Chuck DeVore, Vice President of Policy over at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. You can visit their website at texaspolicy.org. And if you want more information on the story we were just talking about with Chuck, you can go to Breitbart, Texas, and you can look up that story there. Lots of good information there. Chuck, as always, appreciate your time today.
It's great to be with you.
And we'll visit with you again next week.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. Have a good one. That's Chuck DeVore over at the Texas Public Policy Foundation.